Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
My name is Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 15 of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Wonders of the Last Sea.
If you can't hear it already, Daniel is super excited about this chapter, and tell us why.
This has historically been my favorite chapter of the book.
That's so fun.
This has usually been the chapter that really just pulls me into the story further than I thought I could already go.
Wow.
I've talked a couple of times
about
this.
Does it push you to the edge?
Yes, it does push me to the edge. I've talked about this a couple of times on the show before, but before we started, I reread all of the books except The Horse and His Boy to kind of get excited and to get myself a better idea of the series. So it was my first time or just second time reading most of the books as an adult. And when I got to this chapter of The Dawn Treader, which I had not read, for years and years, and this is just 2 years ago I did this, I got to this chapter and I was like, I don't remember any of this, and this is so incredible. And this was what sold me as this being my favorite book in the series at the time. And I can't wait till we eventually finish the podcast, and then we go back and re-rank them, because I don't know where the books will kind of fall in order once we do the whole podcast. But this is my favorite chapter of my favorite book as it stands here in 2020.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, well, let's dive in.
So in the last episode, the crew of the Dawn Treader, they met Ramandu and his daughter, and then they left the island that has Aslan's table at it and sailed further east. So it is an odd chapter, which means I have the chapter summary. Are you ready?
Let's go.
As the Dawn Treader makes her way through the last sea, the crew notices distinct changes in the world around them. They sleep, eat, and talk less, while the sun appears to be growing larger and larger. On their second day of travel, Lucy notices sea people on a hunt. Drinian encourages her not to share this with the rest of the crew, fearing that some of them would be tempted to leave the voyage. After going overboard, Reepicheep discovers that the water is sweet. The crew begin drinking the water, which Reepicheep calls drinkable light. Once they have drunk the water, the crew is able to bear the light of the sun, sea, and air, and they continue to eat and talk less as the water sustains them. In the ethereal sea, the Dawn Treader continues east, even without a wind behind it.
Nice summary.
You like that?
Yeah, that was good.
This is such a unique chapter. And the thing that stands out the most to me about it is the ethereal atmosphere. That's really the word that comes to mind the most. I used it there in the summary. It feels otherworldly, and if you're reading these in publication order, nothing in Narnia has ever felt like this before. It is so unique, and you really do get this sense of we are in an unknown place. This is the most magical Narnia has ever felt to me.
Yes. Yeah, so it was fantastical before, but now it's even more so. Time is changing, light is changing, their energy levels are different. Mm-hmm. So good.
Yeah, I mean that's what stood out to you.
Yeah, for sure. This is so much further removed from reality, and I think that Lewis is really hitting his stride here, where not that everything was poor quality before. This is just, he is really getting into it now. He's building on the things that he's been setting up the entire book, and really the past two books included in that. Yeah,
that's such an interesting thing, because more than the other climaxes of the first two books, Wardrobe and Caspian, this one feels like a bigger climax in a way, even though there's not any antagonist here. There's no big battle or anything.
It's a big turning point.
Exactly. And for some reason, it feels like we have reached this incredible climax of the story. And we haven't mentioned it, but this is the penultimate chapter. There's only one more chapter to go after this one. And as I'm reading this, I really do feel like we are at the journey's end. And I've never thought about this before, but it feels more powerful than the battle at the end of Caspian, or the battle after Aslan's resurrection in chapter 16 and then beginning of 17 of Wardrobe. And it is different anyway. We did talk about how in Wardrobe, the climax of the book is really Aslan coming back. It's not the battle itself. And so I don't want to say that, oh, this is a more powerful moment than Aslan coming back from the dead. I don't know if I feel like that. I still think that's probably the most powerful moment in the whole series for me so far is him coming back to life. But this does just feel, this whole story has felt like almost like this like escalating curve where it moves exponentially here at the end. I think of it just like a math, like a data curve or something.
It's increasing at an increasing rate.
Exactly. And so like we hit this like exponential rate where all of a sudden it went from like, okay, it's building, and then we're like, it's out of control. This doesn't feel real anymore.
Right.
And I'm sure this is how the characters feel. And I think that's why I love this chapter so much, is because I'm feeling the same kind of feelings that Lucy and Edmund are, and Eustace and Caspian is here as well. And instead of like, oh, wow, what a wonderful story, I love reading it, I feel like I'm in it more than I ever have before.
Yeah, that's such a good way to put it.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and read the first paragraph of this chapter, and it's such a wonderful way to begin. It really establishes this atmosphere. Very soon after they had left Ramandu's country, they began to feel that they had already sailed beyond the world. All was different. For one thing, they all found that they were needing less sleep. One did not want to go to bed nor to eat much, nor even to talk except in low voices. Another thing was the light. There was too much of it. The sun, when it came up each morning, looked twice, if not 3 times, its usual size. And every morning, which gave Lucy the strangest feeling of all, the huge white birds, singing their song with human voices in a language no one knew, streamed overhead and vanished astern on their way to their breakfast at Aslan's table. A little later, they came flying back and vanished into the east.
Again, just describing how different things are.
I mean,
they need less sleep.
Isn't that weird? That like kind of freaks me out a little bit in a good way, that they're only talking also in low voices. There's a complete change of the atmosphere. And if we juxtapose this with, let's say, like the first entry into Narnia, like when Lucy goes through the wardrobe, right? So there is a change in setting when that happens, but not as much a change in atmosphere of the actual physics around her, right? And it gets colder, it's snowy, there's tree branches now, and it's an incredible transition from the wardrobe to the snowy forest.
But there's no mention of a different amount of light.
Nothing like that.
2 or 3 times, the sun seems 2 or 3 times larger.
And exactly, and Lucy doesn't get out there, I don't have any hunger anymore. I mean, this is so odd here. And let's talk a little bit about the sun, because like I said, there's this exponential rate at which the sun becomes more and more important. And we've mentioned a little bit about Dr. Ward and the Narnia Code and Planet Narnia. And it's here, really, in these last few chapters that we've started to see the sun become play a bit larger role. Here, it's very much in front of us. And I think for people who are more cynical or skeptical of Dr. Ward's hypothesis of, each book being related to a different heavenly body in the medieval cosmology, I think this is one of the strongest cases to be made, is how much the sun, which is supposedly what this book is focused on, how much of a role it plays here at the end. I mean, it is right in front of us. It's literally right in front of the Dawn Treader as they're sailing.
Yeah.
It's very clearly, I think, for me, as someone who is mostly on board with Dr. Ward's hypothesis, I think for me, this is one of the things that really sells me on it, is how large a role the sun plays here in this book at the end.
Yeah.
Are you still? I mean, still, I know we haven't talked a ton this season. We talked more about the martial imagery and Mars back in Caspian. Are you still on board with Dr. Ward's hypothesis?
I feel like I am. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing to disprove that.
Yeah.
Has appeared.
And I know some people feel really passionately one way or the other. And for me, it's like, it's fun. It's fun to add it. Dr. Ward's a lot smarter than I am. And a lot of these things make sense for me. And whether Lewis intended it or not, it's really fun to engage with it. I feel like I make everyone unhappy because I don't really pick a side. Yeah. And so that's the way to do things, right? Upset all of our listeners.
Yeah. I have a lot of questions after this life, but one of them is going to be for C.S. Lewis.
You're going to ask him about that?
Was Ward right when he said this?
You can ask that, and you're like, what's going on with the Bermuda Triangle? Those are your two questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Where have you been?
So, So I do love how much the sun is coming into the forefront of the atmosphere here. There is then an incredible scene here as Lucy looks down at the sea and notices how clear the water is. There's this description of Lucy looking down and noticing this like black spot, this black object, at the bottom, in the sea somewhere. She's trying to figure out what it is. And Lewis, just as an incredible wordsmith, walks us through from her perspective of what's happening in her mind, and we finally get to the realization of, oh my goodness, this is the bottom of the ship that she can, or the reflection of shadow of the ship on the bottom of the ocean floor that she can see so far down, and we find out at the same moment that she does, and that's such a fun revelation. And then just like imagining, wait, how weird is this sea that you can see to the very bottom?
It's a very masterful reveal. Mm-hmm. The way he describes this crust of bread going toward it, but then it seems to go through it, and that means that it's not an actual object. She's actually seeing the shadow of the ship down below. He compares it to what you see when you're looking out of a train. Yeah. Which I think just almost anybody reading it, even if it hasn't been a train, you've seen the shadow of whatever vehicle you're in, and you understand what that looks like. That was so fun to read.
Yeah. Have you ever been to a large body of water that is extremely clear and you can see to the bottom of?
Yes.
Where is this?
It wasn't super deep, but there was a place in Florida that we went, and the water was super, super clear. And there was this point where it was maybe 4 or 5 feet deep, and then 8, and then 25 feet deep. And a friend of mine lost his wedding ring down there.
Oh, and that's a bummer. Yeah. Yeah, I've experienced this twice before that really come to mind. And neither place is like The Last Sea here, but I want to describe it just for a second because it reminds me of how it lets me get a better idea of what Lucy must be feeling. One is there's a lake in Montana in Glacier National Park called Lake McDonald that just this past summer, Anna and I were at, and we were out kayaking on it, and we were going pretty far out into this lake, and we're looking, and it's like 15, 20 feet down, which still isn't that deep, but it is so weird to be like, wow, I can see 20 feet below me into the water. And then there's I have been swimming at a beach in Panama, like a little out near kind of the Pearl Islands, which are a little bit south of the isthmus that is Panama. And out there we could see, I was swimming pretty far out from the beach on this island, and I could see like a coral reef like pretty far down below me. And it was in some ways I felt more unsafe because I could see what was below me as opposed to going out in the Atlantic Ocean, swimming out there, you can't see anything, right? Yeah. And I somehow felt safer because that's just what I'm used to, as someone living in America, I'm more used to swimming out there than being out in this one place where I'm like, I can see all the bottom, and it freaks me out because it doesn't feel real. And I'm sure that so many of these different emotions must be going through Lucy's head as she's looking out into the sea here.
Yeah, and keep in mind, she's already pretty immersed in this weird world. Like they've already talked about how they're not eating as much. They're talking in quiet voices. Everything. The stage is already set for that.
It's also fun because for here at the end of this, it's not a trilogy, but here at the end of this third book, we're kind of almost ending a little bit like the story began. So it's in that first and second chapter of Wardrobe, a couple of books ago, that Lucy first enters into Narnia. And here in the last 2 chapters of Dawn Treader, we're almost getting Lucy experiencing this new Narnia once more. And I just love this. These things are kind of bookending these first 3 books here, which really do work together. They could be a trilogy in a way. And I do love the fact that we're ending here with Lucy exploring and getting to experience a new Narnia or this new setting once more.
Yeah.
Just pause for a second. Do you, just thinking ahead to The Silver Chair, which is our next book, do you know anything about this book? Because we're about to get to the end of this book, Dawn Treader, I mean. Do you have any idea how this book ends or what happens in the next one?
So The Silver Chair is the one that I remember the most of.
Okay.
Because there's one scene in particular in the movie, the BBC movie, that has just been frozen in my head for a long time.
Yeah.
And But other than that scene, I don't remember a ton about it.
Okay.
I do know that I had that one read to me.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering. And that's a little off topic here, but just as we wrap this
And
up.
I have no idea how this one's going to end.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
I
exciting.
wonder if they're going to leave Reepicheep. Because it sounds like they are.
I don't want to say anything.
Yeah.
Feels like giving me eyes like, please just tell me.
I just
you need to tell me. I'm not going to do. Well, here's the thing. As soon as we're done recording
what's great
this,
is I can go home
yeah,
and I can read the next chapter after we record this.
exactly. You can stay here if you want to read it. It's fine.
Yeah.
Actually, no, you need to go home. I'm just kidding.
Thanks, man.
So let's jump back into the text here. What happens next, Phil, as Lucy's staring down into the sea?
So she's watching the shadow, and then all of a sudden, the shadow gets a lot closer. And it looks like an underwater mountain range. And then she sees a castle. And this part's just so fun. Because why is there a castle under the sea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool, and this is the reveal of the sea people. And there's a great illustration, which I'll put in the episode's description. I hope you have it there in your book. I have it in full color here in the Kindle, and it's gorgeous.
Can I see?
Yeah, it's one of the most colorful ones that I think we've seen so far in the book.
Oh, wow. That looks great in color.
Yeah, and
I have that in black and white.
Oh, okay, that's the beginning of your chapter. Yeah, Lucy looking down at the sea people riding on their what are they? They're seahorses, right? Yeah, I think they're seahorses.
But they're not tiny ones.
No. Although that would be a very funny thing to see, like large sea people with these like tiny little seahorses. But there's a description of them and just the way that they are in this kind of hunting party that Lucy notices. And I love that Lewis tells us, here's why they're on top of these mountains. You got to think about it differently from our world, where we might have a village or some kind of civilization in a valley away from the mountains, where it's warmer and just maybe safer. But here in their land under the sea, the dark things live down in the valleys, and so they have to build their castle, their kingdom here on top of the mountains. I just love this, and we're going to get to this later in the chapter. There's this idea of fairy tales in our world versus fairy tales in Narnia. Mm-hmm. And it's like, hey, that thing that you might think of in your own fairy tales where maybe there's this kingdom in the valley and the evil thing lives up on the mountain. It's like, no, it's actually the opposite.
The mountains are safer because they're closest.
Exactly.
To the
I love that.
Yeah. And it's another good example of how Lewis provides enough detail, but not too much detail. If he tried to explain everything, it might start to break down. But this is enough where it's like, oh, that's why they're on the top of the mountain. That's fine.
Yeah, this is where Lewis's world building in Narnia, I think, is at its best, because it's what he does so well, which is gives us enough information to be interested, but leaves so much of it to our imagination that this could be anything to us, right? Maybe you're reading this and you're just picturing the castle from like a Little Mermaid or something, and you totally can. Maybe you're thinking of something extremely different than that.
Atlantis, if
you will, right? There's so many different options as to what this could be. And Lewis doesn't tell us a lot, and I actually love that. This, to me, is like, if you're going to make a Narnia series, right, this is the other kind of Narnia story that I want. The Sea People story? That's incredible. Like, give me more of that. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah. Completely unrelated. Have you read any of the recent Star Wars comics, maybe in the past 3 years?
I read them when they first came out, like in 2015, when they switched the canon over, but I stopped about 2017, 18. I just couldn't keep up with
Did you read any about Darth Vader on Mon Calamari? The only reason to bring it up is there's an entire... Star Wars is really cool underwater. And I think that it made for really good extra content in addition to the movie. So I would love to see an extra Narnia series too.
Yes.
Go ahead and draw it.
There's a couple of... We should get Andrew to ask him about this, get him back on the show, because there's a couple of episodes of the Clone Wars, the Star Wars TV show, that take place on Mon Cala, which is where the Mon Calamari live. And for people who aren't super Star Wars nerds like us...
they're the squid people.
Yeah, Admiral Akbar. It's his people. They literally look like fish.
And if you don't know who that is, he's the one who says, it's a trap.
Exactly. So the... this is now what I'm picturing is actually that's what all these people look like. I'm going to forget Pauline Baines' illustration, and instead it's Admiral Akbar and all of his people riding around on, seahorses,
Yeah.
and that would be great. Here we go. Who would have thought this is where the Star Wars crossover will happen with Narnia?
Right, but it's right here.
It's right here. No, that's great. And Phil, you were going to read a little bit about this description of them, right?
Yeah, this is so good. There were between 15 and 20 of them, and all mounted on seahorses. Not the tiny little seahorses which you may have seen in museums, but horses rather bigger than themselves. They must be noble and lordly people, Lucy thought, for she could catch the gleam of gold on some of their foreheads, and streamers of emerald or orange-colored stuff fluttered from their shoulders in the current. Then, "Oh, bother these fish," said Lucy, for a whole shoal of small fat fish swimming quite close to the surface had come between her and the sea people. But though this spoiled her view, it led to the most interesting thing of all. Suddenly, a fierce little fish of a kind she had never before seen came darting up from below, snapped, grabbed, and sank rapidly with one of the fat fish in its mouth. And all the sea people were sitting on their horses staring up at what had happened. They seemed to be talking and laughing. And before the hunting fish had got back to them with its prey, another of the same kind came up from the sea people. And Lucy was almost certain that one big sea man, who sat on his seahorse in the middle of the party, had sent it or released it, as if he had been holding it back till then, in his hand or on his wrist. "Why, I do declare," said Lucy, "it's a hunting party, or more like a hawking party." "Yes, that's it. They ride out with these fierce little fish on their wrists, just as we used to ride out with falcons on our wrists when we were kings and queens at Cair-Paravel long ago. And then they fly them, or I suppose I should say swim them, at the others. How?" She stopped suddenly because the scene was changing. It's hard to stop because...
I know, I wasn't sure. I just every time we got to a new paragraph, I'm like, is he going to stop here? We going to
Yeah.
go on? It's great. I was
it's
enraptured by the story.
It's just good writing.
Yeah. Why did you choose to read that particular selection?
We're introduced to a type of people that we haven't really met in Narnia.
Mm-hmm.
And this is... We're not even fully sure what to base them off of. Everything else is an animal who can either talk, or there are a few examples of animals who can't talk, but it still is pretty grounded in reality. But this is... I don't think we've seen any fish that talk yet, right? And we're not going to interact with these people as far as I can tell from this chapter.
Sure.
But they do seem to be organizing into a hunting party, so they're not regular fish.
Well, yeah, and the people aren't fish.
Right.
Yeah, okay, so I didn't know if you were saying
it's not like we
fish.
just have fish that are talking. This is like
It's-
a group of people that are organized in a certain way, but they're different than us and they can't communicate with us.
And they're also not like mer people either.
Right.
You know, the Baines' illustration, which we go back and forth on whether it's canonical or not, they clearly have feet. They do not have fins. They don't have tails. They look like people. It looks like they have webbed toes if you look closely, if you zoom in on it. But they're definitely, there's not a tail here.
Or for those of us who don't have a Kindle, if you hold the page up close to your face.
Yeah. But I think almost what I would expect here is for them to be mer people, like a mermaid or something, because that's that's a mythical thing we have, and that's part of the fantasy of our world, like a faun or a dryad or a naiad or some of the Bacchus and Silenus, right? Yeah. Those things are, okay, that makes sense. And there's that clear switch between, these things that are mythical in our world are real here, and then things like Is Man a Myth from Tumnus's library becomes myth here in their world. This isn't, I'm surprised, is what I'm trying to say, that this isn't a mermaid or something, because that would make sense to have, or like a siren or something. That isn't. There doesn't seem to be a direct connection between some kind of myth in our world to then Narnia.
What I think this does is it reinforces the fact that we're no longer in a world that's close to our world.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
This is really different. And I think that if he had made them mer people, the effect would not.
You would have given
the
up.
same.
You would have finished. You'd be like, I'm done with the podcast.
No, I'm just saying that it would kind of pull us back into the world that we know because we've seen that so much.
I like that. That's a really great thought. You're right. It does feel very different because it's not just a talking dolphin or a mermaid or something. It is something like what is that connection? And maybe there are some kind of mythical sea people connection that I'm just missing out on. But for me, I don't find a direct correlation here in our earthly fantasy.
Yeah, in your zeitgeist.
Yeah, exactly. Lucy is then joined by two people. Who comes up and talks to her?
Drenian and Edmund.
And what are they saying? What do they got to say?
Well, I think Drinian's pretty concerned
He seems like it, right?
because he has some experience in such matters.
Yeah.
Or he's heard stories from people who have experience.
He asked them to turn around in a low voice, and Lucia's like, "What's going on?" And Drinian responds, "It'll never do for the sailors to see all that." And he's afraid that they're going to fall in love with the sea women or fall in love with this undersea country itself and not want to return.
Yeah.
He even says it's unlucky to see these people, with the word "these" italicized. What should we make from this?
I think it's italicized because he's emphasizing it.
Yes, I realize that. When I read this the first time, I don't think I go to, we've got to look out for these people, they're bad. I go, they're probably just friendly Narnians.
Yeah.
But he seems to be very concerned that we've got to, we should be worried about them. And in fact, Edmund goes on to say, these are very different than the kind of people who came to our coronation at Cair Paravel a long time ago. Instead, they don't seem like they can even come out of the surface, and it's a good thing that they can't, because they might want to attack us. And he says they seem very fierce. I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking at Baines' illustration. I'm like, they seem nice. They seem friendly. I want to hang out with them. But I guess we're supposed to make that they are not friendly, and we need to be worried about them.
I think it's the not knowing that's important.
Okay.
And he's aware of the risks right off the bat.
And this seems to be the only part of the chapter where any kind of risk is present. This whole chapter, besides the sea people, seems to be, they're literally sailing without wind. Like, that's fine. We just keep going at the same pace. Or
we've got tons of energy with less sleep.
Yeah, and the sun's getting larger, but not hotter.
Right.
It just is weird to me, and I don't have an answer, that for some reason the sea people pose a threat under the sea when so much of when everything above the sea is positive and safe. I don't know. It's interesting to me.
Yeah.
So if any listeners have an idea of kind of what to make of all this, I would love just some thoughts. Obviously there's no right or wrong answer here, but it just seems almost don't get me wrong. I love the description of them here. I'm glad they're here, but it almost just seems odd to me from my perspective that they are slightly dangerous or unknown here when everything else is so happy and safe.
Right. Well, they don't have too much time to dwell on it because they hear a splash.
They do hear a splash. What's going on?
I thought it was an attack at first.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was like too busy staring over at the hunting party. It's a distraction, and then it becomes an attack. But it actually turns out to be not a man, but a mouse overboard.
Yes.
Reepicheep has dove in. Reepicheep dived in the water. Nope, he dove. Let's try it again.
No, he goes into the water.
Reepicheep dove into the water.
Uh-huh.
And Drinian's pretty concerned about him.
Why do you think
we're learning so much about Drinian.
I love that.
So late in this book.
Yeah, Drinian's a great character who really doesn't get his chance to shine until this last bit. He's just so tertiary throughout most of the book, and then here at the end we get more of his personality. He's like this caring maternal figure, right? As Lewis compares him to, like, it's like when your mother gets upset if you run out in the middle of the street much more than a stranger would. Drinian says, it's his response is, it's more trouble than all the rest of the ship's company put together. If there is any scrape to be got into, in it we'll get. Speaking of Reepicheep, it ought to be put in irons, keel-hauled, marooned, and have its whiskers cut off. Which is very aggressive from him. And Lewis is like, hey, it's not that he dislikes him. He's just really concerned. He's very worried.
What does keel-hauled mean?
I think, and if we're wrong, I'm sure we'll hear about it, that it is it when you like tie someone behind the ship and like drag them along?
Oof. Maroon just means painted like a deep red.
Yeah, wait, what? I've been listening to you. Sorry, I was Googling keel hauled, so I was just, yes, keel hauling is a punishment where someone is tied beneath a vessel and thrown overboard. So yes, dragged along. Wow. Yeah. Nice color joke there. I was just like, sure, yeah, whatever you say.
Gotta be careful.
Yeah, no, now everyone's gonna know I'm not really listening to you.
What's a blighter?
It is. It's someone who's regarded with contempt, right? So why do you think Reepicheep jumped in here?
Nothing's gonna hold this mouse back. He just wants to. He wanted to be at the end of the world, and I think he wanted to test if the water was sweet, and so he just jumps in.
Yeah, it's unclear a little bit why he first goes into the water. At first, I was thinking, wait, is he trying to fight the sea people? Like, they haven't really been aggressive yet. Yeah, they're unknown, and they potentially might be, according to Drinian, but they haven't, like, attacked the ship. And Reepicheep doesn't seem to be the kind of mouse who's going to just start fighting someone because he doesn't like the look of them, right? And then, or is it more of this idea, and where I'm kind of come to now, which is he's just ready to keep moving, right? He wants to check out the water, and he's so focused on heading further east to the end of the world, right?
I think he has a goal, and he's just doing what it takes to achieve that goal.
When he gets out of the water, he tells everyone that it is sweet. We have sweet water here.
Well, Drinian tries to keep him quiet. He goes, not a word, because he thought that the mouse was going to talk about the sea people.
Exactly, yeah.
But he doesn't. He goes, it's sweet, sweet, sweet. And Drinian's still a little upset. He goes, what are you talking about? And you needn't shake yourself all over me either, which is this great little detail where everyone has been near a wet dog.
Yeah, exactly. And Reepicheep says, this water is sweet. And did you understand the significance of that as you were reading this, or did you wait? It
wasn't until I heard about the prophecy. I was reminded of the prophecy later on.
Exactly. And the same thing happens for the crew of the Dawn Treader, who have to be reminded that the prophecy goes that where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, there is the utter east. And that's, we're here. The water is sweet. It is not salty anymore. And this, again, it just keeps pushing us into this unknown territory. It's hard for me to imagine this boat on this, sea where it's not salty. I mean, that just doesn't exist in our world. And so it is this one more step of fantasy added upon fantasy and fantasy and fantasy.
Yeah.
So after they talk a little bit about this water, everyone begins tasting it. And here's what Lewis writes. And one by one, everybody on board drank. And for a long time, they were all silent. They felt almost too well and strong to bear it, and presently they began to notice another result. As I have said before, there had been too much light ever since they left the island of Ramadou. The sun too large, though not too hot, the sea too bright, and the air too shining. Now the light grew no less, if anything it increased, but they could bear it. They could look straight up at the sun without blinking. They could see more light than they had ever seen before. And the deck and the sail and their own faces and bodies became brighter and brighter, and every rope shone. And next morning, when the sun rose, now 5 or 6 times its old size, they stared hard into it and could see the very feathers of the birds that came flying from it.
What an interesting way to describe it. They felt almost too well and strong to bear it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever felt like that?
I don't think so.
Have you? One thing it reminds me of is the feeling right before Christmas, especially as a kid, where that excitement is just super intense. And just you have had a few Christmases, you know that it's an exciting time, and you have all that energy. And it's a mix of a lot of things. I think when you're a kid, you're excited about the presents part, but there's also this energy from being around family, and the tradition that goes with it, the not being in school. So even though I enjoyed school, it's fun to have that break.
Yeah.
In December, and just everything's different. There's a different mood. There's different music playing in the stores. Just all this great stuff going on. And I remember feeling so excited about stuff that I could almost couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
Does any of that sound familiar? Or?
Yeah, no, I definitely know what you're talking about now. I think it's a wonderful feeling. And that's just the feeling that is permeating this entire boat or this entire ship at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We then end the chapter with a very interesting and revealing conversation. What did we learn about Narnia? I want to know how you felt about this revelation of Narnia itself.
It's flat.
Yeah, and you actually had talked a little bit. You made a couple of jokes at the beginning of this season about, and I don't remember which episode it was in, but I wanted to say something where you talked about like Narnia being round, and I was like, actually, it's not, and I couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
Were you surprised to learn this?
Well, after the past maybe 4 or 5 chapters, I felt like, okay, it seems pretty clear that it's going to be flat.
Okay.
Because they're going to the edge and things are changing, and it's not quite.
So you were not surprised to learn this?
No. But I was surprised that they acknowledged that our world is round.
Yeah.
I thought It's a little bit iffy, written in the 50s,
Oh my goodness. And in this exchange between Caspian and the rest of our main characters, Eustace, he says, this is all rot. The world's round. I mean, round like a ball, not a table. And this is such a Eustace thing to say, right? Because there's this idea now that's challenging what he believes. And his response isn't to engage with this new idea. It's like, no, I've read the book. This isn't right. Yeah. And Edmund has this much more humble approach where he says, well, our world is, but is this? Much more humble idea of, I don't know, this is true of our world, but we know that things aren't the same here. And Caspian, I love this from Caspian, who is just flabbergasted by this idea that they live on a round world. He's like upset that they didn't tell him.
Yeah, he's saying, you never told me?
He even says, you asked him if he's been to the part that's upside down, where people walk upside down, which is great because this is the kind of stuff that, a kindergartner or a first grader might ask you when you teach them that the world is round. Like, wait a second. So it's a great thing that we live on the place where we're not upside down, right?
Right.
And Caspian's response is like what you would expect from someone first learning that a world is round. And, we learn that in their world, in the world of Narnia, that's how there's many fairy tales of round worlds, but it's just this silly thing that obviously isn't true. And for him, a fairy tale is becoming real, which is what happens all the time when we go into Narnia.
Right. It's such a fun reversal. And what you're expecting is for everyone to be like, what? Narnia is flat? But instead we get, what? Your world is round?
Exactly.
Because you've been in Narnia for so long.
Yeah. And then the chapter ends with a great line from Edmund. This is what he says after Caspian asks, have you ever been to the part where people walk upside down? He says, it isn't like that. And then he goes on to say, there's nothing particularly exciting about a round world when you're there.
It's so true.
And it just ends, and that's how the chapter
every day
ends.
for us.
Exactly. Yeah. It's such a wonderful way to end this chapter. And just the levity that this chapter has as we enter into this final chapter is unlike you would find in most fantasy books. Here we are about to end the book. We don't really know how it ends at this point. Obviously, you have no idea what's going to happen next. And there's not really any tension of, any of our characters are going to be hurt or injured or what's going to happen. It seems like it's mostly going to have a happy ending. At least there's no tension over, death or the destruction of a world. There's no one who's about to take over.
There's no battle.
No, it's just discovery, adventure.
Yeah. Which is one of the goals the whole time, was to get here. Now we're here.
Yeah. Well, any final thoughts, Phil, before we move into our listener feedback?
I don't think so.
So today we have an email from Katie, and it is entitled The Dark Island. Hello, fellow travelers in Narnia. I have been keeping up with your podcast for some time, but never chimed in before. I am now partly because when I was younger, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader was tied as my favorite of the series with The Silver Chair. The sense of adventure and exploration was fascinating to me, especially one particular section of The Silver Chair, which I won't describe as I don't wish to spoil anything for you. Now that I'm older, I think my favorite is The Last Battle, for reasons which I think will become clear when you get there. By the way, thank you so much for reading the stories in the original published order. I firmly believe that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the right way to be introduced to Narnia, although I realize there are perfectly legitimate arguments for chronological order. You asked about thoughts on the Dark Island in this last episode. I think my imagery of this scene has been strongly affected by the BBC series. I distinctly remember Roop looking around and saying in shock, "You've destroyed it!" Personally, I think the island was there, and that Aslan in the form of the albatross destroyed it when he brought them out and saved them. I see it as Roop hearing the ship coming and rushing out to meet them before they could run aground. I believe that albatross is him, capitalize him, in the same way the Holy Spirit is also God. I like that. And I think the final chapter of this book will bear this opinion out when you get there. I teared up when you read Courage, Dear Heart, which I've never done before, so thank you for that emotional connection. I've never wondered before if the island could come back or not, but if you make connections with the existence of fear in the world, it does seem like it makes sense. This is such a deep chapter, and I really appreciate that you guys are making me think so much more about books that I have loved for many years. Further up and further in, Katie.
Well, thanks, Katie.
Yeah, that's a really cool one. What did you...
I think it confirms what we thought.
That's why we read it. We actually, if anyone ever emails us with things that do not confirm what we already believe, we just archive them right there before they even. I'm just kidding. No, I'm going to discourage people not to email us. No. We love all of our emails. But Katie, I really enjoyed this, and it makes me really excited. I don't really remember the BBC version of Dawn Treader, and I'm really excited to get to that in just a short bit of time. Yeah, really, really soon. I really liked Katie's connection too between the Albatross and Aslan, and then she's making some allusions to this final chapter, which I can't wait for you to read, Phil, because I think I agree with Katie in some of her thoughts. If I can read between the lines as to what she's saying to not spoil you. Yeah.
I'm excited too.
And that's a great transition to end the show, because next time we will be back with the season finale. It's really sad in a way. It's sad to be here at the end, but the season finale of the Dawn Treader, and that is chapter 16, The Very End of the World. And I think you can probably guess what's going to happen. In this chapter, Caspian, Lucy, Edmund, Eustace, and Reepitree travel to the end of the world. I didn't want to spoil anything in my description of the chapter. So
makes sense.
Yeah. All right, so that wraps up our show for today. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes out to Elias Dean, Madeline Heising, Hannah Anderson, and John Marr for supporting us at the Care Paravel level. And actually, we just reached a new goal.
And as a result,
And so we watched the 1979 cartoon adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and got to talk about that on the show, which is really fun to talk about it. Yeah. So if you want to know our thoughts, you can head over to Patreon to learn more. You can also follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. And if you have any feedback, you can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com. You can also leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We'd also appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts, because this helps other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Also, make sure you have subscribed to the show in your favorite podcast app so you can wake up to a new episode every other Wednesday. I actually want to pause for a quick second here, because I wanted to thank all of our listeners who have already done that. David Bates from Pints with Jack actually reached out to me and let me know that now if you search C.S. Lewis in Apple Podcasts, we are one of the top 4 results, and we're the top result for Narnia right now.
Sweet.
So thank you to listeners who have given reviews and rated the show, because it really does help.
It's helping a lot.
Yeah, if people are trying to find a podcast that's going through Narnia, they can easily find us, which is great. So we do appreciate that a lot. So thank you to all those people. And so one final thank you for coming along with us on this journey. And we'll be back next time with chapter 16.